continuation of the previous class, uh, where we end up with the appearance of some uh, strange tooth bearing or tooth like uh, organ bearing organisms, the conodonts, that indicates that the uh, skeleton development was initiated. Now, in vertebrates, skeleton evolved initially as a structure made up of some unmineralized cartilage. The bony skeleton actually developed in a far later stage. So the question comes, what initiated the process of mineralization in vertebrates? One hypothesis against the mineralization was associated with a transition in feeding mechanism, that bony mineralization appeared in vertebrates. The early chordates probably were suspension feeders, but over time they became larger and were able to ingest larger particles, even sometimes the small animals. So this change in uh, food habit requires some mineralization or mineralized structures in the vertebrates like the conodont dental elements. And this is an adaptation that have allowed these animals to become scavengers and predators also. So mineralization of the vertebrate body have begun in the mouth and later was incorporated into an protective armor. Only in more derived vertebrates the endoskeleton begin to mineralize, starting with the skull. Now, in earlier Paleozoic times, we already came to know that there was jawless vertebrates, or more precisely, jawless craniates were very common. But during the development of vertebrates, when first jaw bearing vertebrates, that is the gnathostomes, came into the scenario, they have surprisingly outnumbered the jawless vertebrates, which were previously the dominant group in the oceans. So, gnathostomes are the true jaw-bearing vertebrates first appeared in the history of life. Gnathostome means its jaw mouth. That is, it is named after their jaws. That is the hinge structures found in the mouth, which also consist of some tooth-like structures, and that basically helps them to grip food items firmly and slice them. Uh, According to some researchers, the gnatostome forebrain is enlarged compared to other craniates, mainly in association with enhanced senses of smell and vision. Another characteristics of this aquatic gnathostome is the lateral line system. As you can see in the fishes, that their mid fin is the lateral line, and every organ is a uh, symmetric. That means they occur in both sides of this lateral uh, line in pairwise. So this is the lateral line system, and this was found in the aquatic gnathostomes that organs form a row along each side of the body, and they are very much sensitive to vibrations in the surrounding water. Now, how jaws appeared in these early vertebrates? According to one hypothesis, gnatostom jaws evolved by modification of the skeletal rods. Here you can see these are the pharyngeal slits, and within the pharyngeal slits, these are the skeletal rods. With their evolution, with their development, it was thought that the jaws appeared in the early vertebrates. This modification is supported uh, the anterior pharyngeal or gill slits. Here you can see that the skeletal rods uh, located between the gill slits near the mouth, and among all the skeletal rods, this it is thought that this red colored rod and the green colored rod, they are modified to jaws. Here you can see the gradual development. Here you can see the green colored portion and the red colored portion, and ultimately the third picture where the full jaw is developed. And according to this hypothesis, pair of rod anterior to these rods which formed jaws, they are either lost or incorporated into the cranium of jaws. Here you can see in these red and green colored rods, before that there are two rods, but during development of jaws, these rods are basically either lost or they are fused with these jaw structures. Now, these uh, rod-like structures which are fused, uh, they or the remaining rods within the gill slits, they are no longer required for suspension feeding that remained as the major sites of respiratory gas exchange with the external environment. So now the vertebrates can uh, firmly pick up their food items. Now, gnathostomes appeared in the fossil record in the late Ordovician period, and steadily they became one of the diverse uh, groups in aquatic world. Their success probably resulted from a combination of anatomical features like the paired fins, the tails, uh, which allowed them to swim efficiently. Their jaws enabled them to grab their prey and simply bite of chunks of flesh. The earliest gnathostomes in the fossil record include the extinct lineages of armored vertebrates known as placoderms. The placoderms get their name from the platy skin they have. So from that, these earliest gnathostomes are known as placoderms, and most placoderms are almost a meter long, and there are also some exceptionally giant form also which can range up to 10-meter length. Apart from placoderms, the other groups of jawed vertebrates collectively called the acanthodians, and all they emerged at roughly at the same time during the Silurian Devonian periods. Among these two, the placoderms disappeared at around 359 million years ago, whereas acanthodians became extinct just before the KPG mass extinction, that is around 70 million years. Uh, sorry, acanthodians extinct after 359, 70 million years after the placoderms disappeared. Now, new fossil discoveries was happened in the previous tens of years, and they suggest that around 450 to 420 million years ago, that is the period of a major evolutionary change. The gnathostomes lived during this time period. They had diverged into three lineages. So, at this time, 420 million years ago, a divergence of gnathostomes happened. They diverged into majorly three lineages of jawed vertebrates which survived till date. First, the chondrichthyans or chondrichthyes. Second, the ray-finned fishes, and thirdly, the lobe-finned fishes. Together, these ray-finned and lobe-finned fishes are known as osteichthyes. Now, coming to chondrichthyes. Chondrichthyes, which means the cartilage fish, and they include the sharks, the rays, and all their relatives, and they become one of the successful vertebrate creators in the oceans soon after their appearance into the fossil record. Now, the chondrichthyes, they have a skeleton composed predominantly of cartilage, though often impregnated with calcium. Now, it is very interesting that when the name of chondrichthyes was first proposed in the uh, 19th century or in the 18th to 19th century, scientists thought that chondrichthyans represented an early stage in the evolution of vertebrate skeleton, and mineralization had evolved only in more derived lineages. So, these cartilaginous fishes, they are very early stage of forming the bony skeleton. Still, the bony skeleton part or bony skeleton bearing vertebrates did not appear in the fossil record. However, as conodonts and armored jawless vertebrates demonstrate, the mineralization of the vertebrate skeleton had already begun before the chondrichthyan lineage branched off from other vertebrates. The bone-like tissues have been found in early chondrichthyans also. Some traces of bone-like material or bone-like structure also found in living chondrichthyans in their scales, the base of their teeth, and in a thin layer on the surface of the vertebrae. So, bone-like material is also found in different parts of the chondrichthyans body, like the scales, their teeth, in their skin, in their vertebrae, but proper bony structure is not uh, found to appear in these uh, early chondrichthyes. And the bony material presents in different parts of the chondrichthyan body suggest that the restricted distribution of bone in the chondrichthyan body is a derived condition, and these chondrichthyans uh, survived over 400 million years. Today, they are one of the most uh, uh, severely threatened uh, in the ocean body because of the overfishing. Next, the ostriches. Ostrich means bony fish. So here the bony skeletal material first come into the scenario. Majority of the vertebrates belong to the clade gnathostomes called ostriches, and unlike chondrichthyans, nearly all living ostrichthyans have ossified or bony endoskeleton with a hard matrix of calcium phosphate. So you can see the mineralization have starts to occur within these ostrichthyans. Aqu- Generally, aquatic ostrichthyans, informally known as fishes. Now, most fishes they can control their buoyancy with an air sac known as swim bladder that we all know, and movement of gases from the blood to the swim bladder increases buoyancy, making the animal rise. Oppositely, when the gas moved from that swim bladder to blood, that means from swim bladder it goes back to blood, causes the animal to sink. Now, Charles Darwin proposed that the lungs of uh, tetrapods evolved from swim bladders. So, according to Charles Darwin, these swim bladders within the fishes that actually evolved into the lung structure in the more derived tetrapod or reptile forms. But the thing is, the scenario is exactly opposite. Ostrich in mainly early branching lineages have lungs, and they use these lungs to breathe air as a supplement to gas exchange in their gills. So the early ostrichthyans, some ostrichthyans basically, they have both lungs and gills. So this indicates that lungs arose in early ostrichthyans. Later, swim bladders evolved from lungs into some lineages. So what Darwin thought that from swim bladders to lungs developed or lungs evolved, the scenario is exactly opposite. In early ostrichthyans, there were swim bladders, and actually, uh, and also the lungs, and from that lungs, the early lungs, from that swim bladders evolved. Now, within ostriches, there are two groups. One is known as ray-finned fishes, that is named for the bony rays that support their fins. Here you can see the bony structures in the above figure, and they radiated from their body. So that is why they are known as bony rays. These support their fins. The other group that is known as lobe finned, uh, which which got its name due to the presence of some rod-shaped bones surrounded by a thick layer of muscle in their pectoral and pelvic fins. Here you can see this is the pelvic fin, and within that fin some bony structures are already formed, having in the pelvic fin there is tibia, femur, fibula that are identified. Similarly, in the pectoral fin, the bony structure like humerus, ulna, radius that are found. So, like the tetrapods or more evolved vertebrates, the bones in the forelimbs and back limbs, uh, what we found in the evolved vertebrates, those bones starts to form or starts to appear in these lobe-finned fishes. Next, the tetrapods. Uh, One of the most significant event in the vertebrate history took place at around 365 million years ago when the fins of some lobe fin fishes evolved into the limbs and feet of tetrapods. Here you can see the lobe fin fishes, as I previously showed you, that within their pelvic and pectoral fin, the bony structures evolve. Bony structure starts to appear, and from that, in the early tetrapods, proper limbs having all those bones in pelvic limb as well as in pectoral limb, they are found to develop. The most significant character of tetrapods gives the group its name, that is the 4 feet. In place of pectoral and pelvic fins, tetrapod have limbs with digits. Their limbs basically support weight on land, or that helps it to move over the land surface, and they have a opposing thrust during walking or crawling on the land surface. The digits within the feet, they efficiently transmit this muscle generated force to the ground when the tetrapod walks over the land. So life on life from the swimming uh, organisms to change from the land crawling organisms, that makes some change to the body plan of the vertebrates. From swimming to walking or crawling vertebrates, it requires some changes in the body plans. And tetrapod basically, the early tetrapod basically shows those changes. So in these early tetrapods, the head is separated from the body by a neck that uh, originally had one vertebra on which the skull could move up and down. Later, with the origin of second vertebra in the neck, the head could also swing from side to side. So initially, the head and the vertebra, that means uh, the skull region, had separated uh, the body by the neck with only one vertebra present there, and that basically facilitates to move the skull or move the head only in up and down, but not in the sidewise. Later in the evolutionary path, when the in this neck region another vertebra came, that means now the neck region contains two vertebra, that basically allows these early vertebrates to move the head region sidewise along with up and down. Also, the bones of the pelvic girdle, here you can see the bones in the pelvic girdle to which the hind legs are affected are fused to the backbone, that basically permits forces generated by the hind legs against the ground to be transferred to the rest of the body. These bones of the limbs, particularly the pelvic limbs, they are attached with these backbones, some bony structures. Here you can see in this early amphibian. This is directly attached with the backbone, and due to that, when the thrust generated due to their walking or moving over the land surface, that force, that opposite force, is circulated throughout the body. If it is not circulated, then there is a chance that those bones are affected and they may suffer breakage of bones or severe dysfunction, dislocation of bones. So the attachment of the pelvic limb bones with the uh, vertebra or with the uh, backbone, uh, basically to distribute the forces generated during their movement on land. Next, the origin of tetrapods. During the Devonian time, the coastal wetlands were the favorite place for many wide range of lobe-finned fishes. Those entered particularly shallow, oxygen-poor water. They could use their lungs to breathe air, and some species probably used their stout fins to help them move across logs or the muddy bottom. So, in tetrapod body plan, this tetrapod body plan was simply a modification of a pre-existing body plan. That means these lungs, they are used as a respiratory organ, and these uh, pectoral fins, which already have bones within that, they are used for locomotion within the muddy substrate or within tree logs, etc. A recent discovery of fossil called Tiktaalik, which had fins, gills, and lungs, and its body is covered with scales like a fish. But unlike fish, Tiktaalik have a full set of ribs that would have helped it breathe air and support its body. Also, unlike fish, Tiktaalik had a neck and shoulder which allowing it to move its head. Finally, the bones of Tiktaalik's front fin have the same basic pattern found in all limbed animals. Here you can see the fossil of Tiktaalik. Here you can see the flat skull, eyes on top of the skull. Previously, eyes occurs on the from the medial line system. Eyes occur on both sides of the skull, as you can see in fishes. Now, in this transition form, the skull become flattish and eyes come on top of the skull. It has a proper head with neck. There are ribs. So, uh, and fin skeleton in the fins, pectoral and pelvic fins. So these structures indicate that this is a tetrapod. In contrast, some fish characters are also found to be present in this Tiktaalik, that is the occurrence of scales. The fins, although the fins uh, have some bony structures, but still they are in fins. Full bony limbs are not developed in the Tiktaalik. Tiktaaliks also have gills and lungs, which are fish characters. So, from these evidences, which shows that Tiktaaliks have both the fish characters and the tetrapod characters. So basically, Tiktaalik indicates a transition form in the evolution of vertebrates from fish to the early tetrapods. That is why often it is nicknamed as fishapod, fish, and tetrapod. So these early tetrapods are just the initiation when vertebrates try to escape from water to uh, encroach in the land areas. But most of these early tetrapods, they remained tied to water. Now, from these uh, early tetrapods, which are also known as amphibians, that means in their life stage they have tied with water, and at least some stage of their life is connected with water. As the name also suggests that amphibian, it is a derived name from amphibious, which means both ways of life, like the present day what we see in the frogs, in the salamanders, etc. In frogs, we can see that the larval tadpole is usually aquatic. It is herbivore with gills. There was a lateral line system resembling that of the early vertebrates, a long and finned tail. And this tadpole initially lacks eyes. It swims by undulating its tail, but during ontogenetic growth, it suffers major metamorphosis that leads to its second life. From tadpole, then develops legs, lungs, a pair of external eardrums, and a digestive system adapted to a carnivorous diet. At the same time, during this metamorphosis, gills also disappear. But the early stage of frogs, that is actually tied with water. Later, when the metamorphosis happened, when a adult frog forms during their ontogenetic change, then it escape from water and can move into the lands. So uh, amphibians life stages, mainly the uh, one part is restricted to water, and then later they move on land, and during this changeover, most of the amphibians goes through some kind of metamorphosis change within their body plan. Now, because of this water uh, addiction in some stage of their life, most amphibians are found in damp habitats such as swamps or rainforest, etc. Even those amphibians who adapted to drier habitats spend much of their time in burrows or under moist leaves. So those amphibians which lives in drier condition, they have to dig a deep hole within the substrate, that is within a deep burrow within the substrate, where the temperature is relatively cooler and where the condition is relatively moist. That means water vapor rich, humidity is high. Amphibians generally rely heavily on their moist skin for gas exchange with the environment. In amphibians, fertilization is external, and they typically lay their eggs in water or in moist environments on land. The eggs lack a shell and dehydrate quickly in dry water. So if they lay their eggs on land, as they did not have any protection cover over the, or solid protection cover over their uh, fetus, over their eggs, they will quickly dehydrate, and ultimately they suffer death. So to solve this problem, the early tetrapods developed a mechanism that is amniotic egg. So the tetrapods uh, which developed this kind of eggs are known as amniotes. So basically, amniotes are a group of tetrapods which evolved from the early amphibians, and ultimately they evolved to reptiles, birds, and mammals gradually. Now, during their evolution, amniotes acquired a number of new adaptations to life on land. Amniotes are named for the major derived character of the clade, that is the amniotic egg, and this egg contain four specialized membranes. The amnion, first is the amnion, second is the chorion, third the yolk sac, and lastly the allantois. The amniotic egg, the name came from this amnion, which basically encloses a compartment of fluid that baths the embryo and acts as a hydraulic shock absorber. Here you can see this portion is the amnion, where the fetus is swimming in its own private pond or in its own private pool. And also, because of this fluid coverage, it also cushions the fetus against mechanical shock. The second uh, part within the amniotic fluid, that is the chorion. The chorion and the membrane of the allantois, here you can see this is the chorion, exchange gases. This chorion and the membrane of the allantois exchange gases between the embryo and the air. Third, the allantois. This allantois is basically a disposable sac. So all the metabolic waste produced by the embryo, that basically stored uh, in this portion. This sac is known as allantois. And lastly, the yolk sac, this portion which contains all the nutrients. The blood vessels in the yolk sac membrane transport nutrients from the yolk into the embryo, and after that the other nutrients are stored in the egg white, that is the albumin. This portion, this is known as the albumin. So this entire amniotic egg is made up of four uh, membranes, specialized membranes: amnion, this fetus bearing sac with a private pool or with fluid within it; the yolk sac, which supply nutrients to the fetus; the allantois, which is a disposable sac of metabolic waste of the fetus or embryo; and the chorion, that is a uh, cover or membrane which surrounds the all these organs, that means amnion, yolk sac, and allantois, and that membrane helps in gaseous exchange with the uh, air or with the environment. So now you can see the embryo is in a wet state. Embryo is swimming in a watery condition, and there is no fear of getting dried up. Now, the amniotic egg was a key evolution innovation for terrestrial life. It allowed the embryo to develop on land in its own private pond, hence reducing the dependence of tetrapods on an aqueous environment for reproduction. In contrast to the shell-leg eggs of amphibians, the amniotic eggs of most reptiles and some mammals have a shell. Shell significantly slows dehydration of the egg in air because it acts as a protection cover, and that is an adaptation that helped amniotes to occupy a wider range of terrestrial habitats than uh, the amphibians. Amniotes have acquired other key adaptations to life on land. For example, amniotes use their rib cage to ventilate their lungs, and this method is more efficient than throat based ventilation, which amphibians use as a supplement to breathing through their skin. The increased efficiency of rib cage ventilation may have allowed amniotes to abandon breathing through their skin and develop less permeable skin, which also helps to conserve water and restricts dehydration of their body. Now, based on where the fossils of these early amniotes found, it was thought that the earliest amniotes lived in warm but moist environments, as did the first tetrapods also. Over time, however, early amniotes expanded into a wide range of new environments, including dry and high latitude regions, and due to this, they require further development, further evolution of their uh, eggshells. The earliest amniotes were small and had sharp teeth, which is a sign that they were predators. Later groups also included herbivores, as evidenced by their grinding teeth and other features. Now, when vertebrates try to shift from its aquatic life mode to a new life mode, that is a terrestrial or land based life mode, these early amphibians or these early tetrapods, they faced some problem, severe problems. So these are known as problems of living on land. Now, what are those problems? First, the breathing or respiration. Now, fishes which lives in aquatic condition, they obtain oxygen from water by means of gills, but land vertebrates get that oxygen from air by means of lungs. So the early amphibians solved this problem by having well developed lungs. They had inherited lungs from their fish ancestors, as I already told you, who had both lungs and gills. Gills are still the primary method for respiration. In larval amphibians, gills are still present, but when amphibians turn to adult stage, the situation is changed and lungs take over the gills which found in the larval amphibians. Second, the desiccation or drying up. Amphibians have a big threat of desiccation or drying up. So they have to retain their body fluids when they are no longer in water. Now, it is possible that the early amphibians never ventured very far away from the water. They are moving or they are walking very close to the water body. So can whenever they feel they are desiccating, they are drying up, they can immediately return to the water body and make them wet. So, in the early stage of their history, they evolved some kind of body coverings that protect themselves against drying. Some fast amphibians retain the scales as their protective measure, which they get from their fish ancestors. Later, during the Permian period, they develop tough skins, which frequently underlain by ossicles or bony plates. Now, as the outer covering is very tough, so amphibians became more able to spend much time on land out of water. So, the desiccation fear or drying up fear that gradually becomes minimized. The third problem they faced, that is the gravity. To land animals, gravity is an important factor influencing their structure, body structure, and life. In contrast, the fishes who lives in aquatic condition, gravity is little consideration or little consequence because the fishes are supported by the dense water in which they live. But in contrast to the fishes, the fast amphibians which try to live in a lighter medium that is within the air, they developed a strong backbone and strong limbs at an early stage of their evolution. The vertebrate structure of the fishes transforming to interlocking structures that held together by muscles and ligaments that formed a strong horizontal column for the support of the body. The vertebral column was supported at 2 points by limbs. If you consider that is the vertebral column, they are supported at 2 points by limbs. One is the uh, pectoral limb, another is the pelvic limb, and they are attached with the vertebral column by the limb girdles. The girdles in turn were supported by the limbs and the feet. So all the force that acquired by the limbs, they are distributed through the backbone throughout their body. Next problem, that is locomotion. For movement, the early terrestrial vertebrates adapted a new method of locomotion where they used the limbs and feet for movement. The limbs not only used to hold up the body in counteraction to the force of gravity, but also to propel the animals across the land. Here, in these early amphibians, reversion of locomotor function observed. In fishes, what we observed that locomotion was affected primarily by the body and tail, and the paired fins were used for balancing and steering. In contrast, in the early land vertebrates, that is, in the amphibians, the tail sometimes diminished in size and where present in the amphibians, the tail used as some degree of balancing organ. The paired appendages, they become the chief locomotory organs. That means the uh, pelvic and pectoral limbs, they become the chief locomotory organs. And this locomotion pattern, initiated by the amphibians, continued with many variations through the evolution of land vertebrates. So, what fish actually did, they used their paired fins for guiding within the aquatic body. Generally, they swim by using their body and the tail fin for locomotion. When amphibians appeared, oppositely, they use their two limbs, which is basically a evolutionary transition or evolutionary modification of the uh, pectoral and pelvic fins. Amphibians use these pectoral and pelvic limbs as the major locomotory organs. Lastly, the another problem um, these early amphibians faced, that is reproduction. Fishes commonly deposit their eggs in the water where they hatch. In contrast, land animals either have to go back to water to reproduce, or they must develop methods for protecting the eggs on land because of the uh, problem of desiccation. Again, another thing is, in fishes, the male and female counterparts, they throw their sperm and eggs within the water, and the fertilization was external. Because of the water flow, the sperm and eggs come into contact and fertilization happened. But in land vertebrates, that phenomenon is not possible. So amphibians are not very well able to solve the problem. For reproduction, they have to go back to the water body and uh, produce eggs, deposit their eggs in the water. Consequently, these animals throughout their history have been forced to return to the water in some moist places to lay their eggs. But gradually, from these early amphibians, when amniotes are evolved, then this aquatic contact for reproduction is also gradually diminishing. And ultimately, in the more evolved tetrapods, that is in reptiles, they completely detach from this aquatic connection. They have so modified or so evolved eggs, uh, and we already see in the amniote egg structure that the embryo is surrounded by a fluid filled chamber, the amnion. So, and this entire thing is covered by a tough shell. So, they did the desiccation or drying of uh, scenario is completely wiped out, and the tetrapods completely detach themselves from this aquatic connection uh, for reproduction. So, the water connection gradually with evolution in the latter stage of tetrapods, with the appearance of amniotes and their evolution, is disconnected, and they shifted to a new environment, that is the land area. So thank you. uh, I hope you are able to understand. The next part will continue in the next class.